Nicky Pig Slate. Early and late. Nicky Pig Slate.
Walking Through the Fields, an audio tour through the region's coal mining history, featuring local artist Sue Hand's paintings from her Hallowed Ground exhibit depicting the life of coal miners and her narration, presented by the Anthracite Heritage Foundation.
Early and late.
The Anthracite Miners and Their Hallowed Ground. Part 1 starts in the beginning. Coal was formed eons ago from swamp plants buried in layers, the remains of vegetation under incredible pressure. It took 66 feet of peat to produce 5 feet of anthracite coal. This coal was formed in layers underneath Lackawanna and Wyoming valleys and wrapped up on the surrounding mountainsides like the sides of a bathtub. This area is known as the Northern Coalfield of northeastern Pennsylvania. The old-timers referred to the buried valley of Wyoming, the veins of coal interspersed with pockets of quicksand and geologic water. These geologic factors made the mining of coal extremely dangerous. On a hardness scale of 1 to 100, diamond is 100, anthracite coal is 95. That's why it's sometimes referred to as black diamonds. Part 2 honors breaker boys and other anthracite workers. Breakers were large, dark, and dusty buildings used for sorting coal. Breaker boys were as young as ages 7 or 8, occasionally as young as 5 in the earliest days of coal mining. These little boys sat from sunup to sundown 6 days a week for long, back-breaking hours on slanted chutes, sorting coal as it rushed by their bare hands. It was their job to pick out the slate and the culm, or waste, as it all moved down through the chutes. Gloves were not allowed because it would slow them down. Fingers bled or were broken. Coal is extremely sharp, and it was horrible, dangerous, cold, and dusty work. Breaker boys graduated to being nippers inside the mines. Nippers were boys 10 or 11 who were door tenders. The doors were part of the mine's circulation system and had to be opened to allow the passage of gangs of coal cars. These doors were very heavy wooden affairs. Sometimes the nippers fell asleep as they sat alone in the dark, and they were crushed to death as a gang of cars smashed through the doors. Nippers graduated to spraggers. Spraggers were older boys of ages 12 or 13 or 14 who controlled the speed of the coal cars moving down inclines by inserting sprags into the wheels. Sprags were small logs 1 to 2 feet in length, carved with bullet-like ends, which could be inserted into the spokes of coal cars to act as brakes. Spraggers usually worked in pairs. They sometimes lost hands or arms, or were crushed when coal cars jumped the tracks. Then, the miners also lost their pay for that carload of coal as it dumped over. Spraggers graduated to mule drivers and then to laborers, which was the name of the miners' assistants, and then to a full miner trained to light the dynamite for controlled explosions inside the mine to loosen the coal. All of these anthracite workers faced the possibility of death on a daily basis.
12 years, 12 years, 8 years, 12 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, 12 years, 12 years, 8 years, 12 years, 7 years, 9 years, 9 years, 12 years, 6 years, 7 years, 12 years.
Dunking's history with coal mining, as it was originally founded to educate the sons of coal miners, did it seem fitting for your artwork to find a permanent residence here?
Absolutely. It was a dream come true, really, when Jim Burke, I was selling these hexagons piece by piece. And Jim Burke, when he saw the collection, he asked me to stop selling pieces and to hold on to it. And he purchased the whole thing. And he was looking all over for a really good place to put it. When this happened at King's, it was really a dream come true for both Jim Burke and myself. It's the perfect spot.
10 years, 12 years, 12 years, 8 years, 12 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, 12 years, 12 years, 8 years, 12 years, 7 years, 9 years, 9 years, 12 years, 6 years.
Part 3 tells of heroes, heroines, and martyrs. Major losses of life in the mines were usually the result of mine fires or explosions, although roof caves also took their toll. Explosions were a constant danger. Black powder was used for blasting. Fuses were unreliable. Sometimes a seam of coal caught fire after an explosion, emitting sulfurous fumes which suffocated the miners. Explosions created martyrs. As for heroes, no clerical figure looms larger in anthracite history than Monsignor John J. Curran. He was born in Holly in 1859 and grew up in Avoca. At age 8, he became a breaker boy and moved up to mule driver before entering seminary. In 1895, he was assigned to Wilkes-Barre's East End. He organized Holy Savior Parish, built a church, and stayed for 23 years. During the anthracite strike of 1902, Father Curran attempted to help the miners by pleading with George Baer, spokesman for the coal owners, with President Oliphant of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, and with J.P. Morgan, who deferred to Baer. Curran then met with President Theodore Roosevelt and continued to plead for the cause of the miners. He and Roosevelt became lifelong friends. And when Theodore Roosevelt opened his second presidential campaign, it was at East End's Holy Savior Church. Monsignor Curran was a friend of presidents, advisor of labor, confidant of authorities, and benefactor of humanity.
The exhibit at King's on the Square is divided into 11 different sections, starting with the formation of anthracite coal, all the way through the 2 centuries of coal mining the area has had. Was it originally broken up this way when you were painting it, or was it King's decision?
When I started painting these hexagons, I knew next to nothing about coal mining. I decided to do the project as a learning experience. I heard an artist once say that if he wanted to learn something, he wrote a book about it and did sketches of it. When I want to learn about something, I do a series of paintings about it. So I decided to do a series of paintings about coal mining. And I really literally knew nothing when I started. And I was confused. I didn't know what a colliery was from a breaker. I didn't know the difference between what was a Loki. I had no idea what a Loki was. I didn't understand what a drift and a tunnel and a shaft and a slope were. And I'd read about all these things, and I had no idea what they were. So it was an evolution of my artwork. I was the one who organized it into sections. If I did it now, I know a lot more about coal mining. If I did it now, I would have arranged it a little bit differently. But King's actually displayed it as I put it into a catalog of the artwork.
Oh, what a place! You sat on a hard seat.
Part 4 looks at anthracite economics and lifestyles. Women were the backbone support of anthracite communities. They managed family finances. They mothered many children. There was no time for self-pity. There was too much work to be done. They had to be responsible, aggressive, hardworking, and enduring. They washed clothes, children, and miners' backs. They ironed, baked, cooked, sewed, planted gardens, preserved food, hauled water, heated water, and prepared bodies for burial. They gave birth at home, taught children at home, worked at home, and died at home. Women taught upcoming generations not only to survive, but to thrive. Anthracite lifestyles included cave-ins. They were a way of life. In 1897, my great-grandfather's home stood on West 8th Street in Wyoming, between Wyoming Avenue and the railroad tracks. One day, during a mine subsidence, that house dropped 4 feet down into the ground, along with several other buildings along the street. My grandfather and his sister climbed out the windows onto the lawn and the sidewalk, but the event was a mere blip on the screen of anthracite. It happened often. Mine owners simply sent workers to jack up the houses, level them, and fill in underneath. Life went on.
You sat on a hard seat. You didn't dare cushion it, no matter.
What was your inspiration behind the anthracite miners and their hollowed ground exhibit? Was it from family history of coal mining or the region's history?
I think my inspiration for this series was from growing up in coal country, from seeing miners go to work and come home from work filthy, dirty, black, and just my memories of the noisy, huge, to me they were frightening breakers. When they were working, they were loud and they shook and they were very scary to me. But a couple of years ago, I realized I really didn't know a whole lot about my own area's coal mining history. So I wanted to learn about it, and that was the inspiration. The title, actually, I was trying to find a really cool title for the project, and during art classes, one of my teenage students came up with the idea of the hollowed ground as a takeoff from the hallowed ground of Gettysburg. And that was the inspiration for the title, The Anthracite Miners and Their Hollowed Ground.
You had to sit on that plain plank.
Part 5 remembers the major disasters. The Avondale disaster was Wyoming Valley's first and largest disaster in lives lost. On September 6, 1869, in Plymouth, an explosion and fire at the Avondale Breaker following a strike took the lives of 110 victims. Called the Welsh Tragedy because of the large numbers of Welsh victims, it was possibly the result of arson. The Twin Shaft disaster in Pittston was the result of a roof collapse inside the Twin Shaft mine on January 28, 1896. Called the Irish disaster, it happened under the Pittston Flats, where the Lackawanna and Susquehanna rivers meet, a bit east of Coxton Yards. 58 men were trapped and died. On June 5, 1919, the Baltimore Tunnel disaster took the lives of 92 miners. More than 40 more were severely injured. 1919 was the peak year of northern coalfields' anthracite industry. 100 million tons of coal were mined that year. 556 men were killed, including the 92 at Baltimore Tunnel. The explosion happened at 6:35 in the morning as miners rode into the mines with kegs of black powder in the cars with them, which was illegal. It exploded and a vicious fire ensued. The Knox Mine disaster was a roof cave-in and a devastating flood on January 22, 1959. The ice-swollen Susquehanna smashed into the river slope section of the Knox Mine. Too much coal had been illegally removed. Originally, there was supposed to be a 50-foot buffer when mining underneath the Susquehanna River. It was then changed to 35 feet. When the Susquehanna broke through that morning, the actual cover was 19 inches in some places. 81 miners and laborers went to work that day. 33 escaped almost immediately. 36 escaped within 8 hours. 12 remain entombed.
Clank, clank, no matter. With your feet in the chute.
There's various writing on many of the art pieces that you've painted. Are they taken from newspapers and personal belongings such as letters and diaries from coal miners and their families?
Yes. The writings on my hexagons were taken from a lot of sources. Some were letters that were loaned to me by some of my art students who had relatives who were in the mines and mining. Some were from magazines, some were from newspaper articles, a few were quotes from books. Some were just from some of my students who heard their parents talking about coal mining, and they were direct quotes from real people.
On a plank, bent over like this.
Part 6 depicts rats, canaries, and mules. It was considered bad luck to harm a rat in a mine because they were an early warning system. Rats could feel the vibration of an imminent roof fall or cave-in. So if the rats started running, the men knew to get out. Rats came in with the hay brought in for the mules. In the mines, they ate anything, even mule and human excrement. There were upwards of 200 rats in a single colony. Some were as large as small cats. Canaries in cages were carried into the early mines as an early warning system. The miners, who often could not smell the bad air or lack of oxygen, kept one eye on the canary while they mined the coal. Since canaries have the smallest lung systems known to man, they would fall off their perch or die if the air got bad, and the miners knew to escape immediately. Mules were the brute strength of the mines. They had the excellent memories for direction and a strong instinct for survival. They were harnessed in tandem because of the narrow passageways. Mule drivers started with one mule and worked up to a 6-mule team, which earned the respect of the miners as well as a man's wages. The mules lived inside the mines. As the mines were electrified, most mules were replaced with lokies, which were small locomotives. In 1966, a law was passed to make it illegal to keep mules inside a coal mine.
And over like this.
Have you heard any stories about the miners encountering any rats at all?
Joe Stella, when he was telling me all about that, he said you'd lay down inside the mine to take a nap. After lunch, you'd eat your lunch, and you always had to be careful of your lunch bucket because the rats could open the little pails. They could open the little snaps on the lunch pails, so you'd have to tie them or something. Of course, they could chew the rope. But he said you'd lay down to take a nap and something would scurry across your legs and it'd be a rat, mine rat. He said you never bothered them. Some of the guys, he always fed them. He'd feed them the bread crusts and stuff because they were valuable. If the rats were there, it was okay, except for the cave-in. Nobody had a chance when that river broke through, even the rats.
Well, I'll tell you, it was very scary. Believe me.
Part 7 concerns transporting anthracite, the canals, and the railroads. Once the coal was mined, broken down, cleaned, sorted, and sized at the breaker, it had to be moved to market. In the early days, that meant rivers with coal arks and barges. Whitewater and boating hazards made canals a necessity. Canals were built alongside the rivers. 2 mules per boat, single file, kept the canal boats moving as coal was transported to Harrisburg, Baltimore, and New York City. Canals which were damaged by river floods were replaced with railroads. The canal channels were filled in and rail tracks were laid on top. The big railroad companies battled each other with cutthroat competition and succeeded in ending canals and canal occupations as well as independent operators. The railroads created jobs as well as new occasions for accidents and deaths. The anthracite coal moved by railroad fueled America's Industrial Revolution.
Your artwork describes various aspects of anthracite mining. Some of it focuses on the mining disasters that have occurred in the area. When researching for this project, did any of those disasters impact you specifically?
I was in high school during the Knox mine disaster, and I remember laying in bed, and my parents were out in the living room listening to the news, and of course, it was all the news. And I remember my father being so upset. My dad worked for the Pennsylvania State Police, and he came home that night. He was so upset. He was a mechanic. He wasn't a state trooper. But he was there at the site and in the garage. And it was, and the troopers had come back, and they were all upset. Even if you didn't know them, they were neighbors. They were friends of somebody you knew, because this valley back then was a lot more tight.
I don't know how in the world I got the nerve to go there in the first place.
Part 8 features coal breakers and other landmarks. There were reputed to be over 400 coal breakers in the northern coal field alone. A coal breaker is the manufacturing plant at the colliery. The colliery was like a campus with many different buildings. The Huber breaker in Ashley was one of the last 3 coal breakers in the United States. It was torn down for scrap metal in 2014, despite a concerted effort to save it for educational, historical, and tourism purposes. It was built in 1939 and served the Huber Colliery as well as 8 other mines. It processed the famous blue coal, which was simply coal sprayed with an iridescent blue pigment as an advertising and marketing gimmick. The Eckley breaker was built in Eckley merely as a stage set for the Paramount movie, The Molly Maguires. It was never a working breaker, but is arguably one of northeastern Pennsylvania's most famous. Eckley was chosen as the movie set because it had changed so little from its coal patch days.
You didn't dare say anything.
You mentioned to me before that King's is displaying 200 out of the 300 pieces you painted. Do you know what has happened to the other 100 pieces and whether or not they will be reunited at all in the future?
I keep reminding people who bought some of the pieces that King's would love to have them back at some point. Some of the people who did purchase them have said that they would will them back to King's or give them back to King's, quote unquote, sooner or later. But as far as I know, none have been returned since the original. When we originally hung it at Cott's, several people did donate theirs back into the collection. But to my knowledge, nobody has done so since. I hear about them occasionally.
Because it was something to have a job at 8 cents an hour.
Part 9 recognizes the middle and southern fields. The Eckley breaker is actually in the eastern middle field near Hazleton. In the southern field, the Lansford No. 9 mine is still open for tours. It is the world's longest working coal mine from 1855 through 1972. Visitors to the mine experience the very real environment of a wet, drippy, dark mine with narrow passageways down carved steps from one coal vein to another.
You didn't wear gloves. You didn't dare.
When you were painting these pieces, did you ever paint them on location in the mines?
I was allowed to go into the Lansford mine all day long to paint. And they took me in on the first train in the morning and brought me out in the last train that afternoon. And I stood there and painted all day long. And there were times when I thought, if they forget me and turn out these lights, I'm going to go stark raving mad. I will not be alive when morning comes. And I didn't know. It was just really made me think about the men who were trapped in cave-ins. And they understood a lot more than I do about what it felt like. But it was quite an experience.
You weren't allowed to wear gloves.
Part 10 highlights the miners' passionate plea. The Molly Maguires were reputed to be a group of militant activists for better pay and better working conditions from inside the ancient order of Hibernians. They were all Irish. There are numerous books and theories about the Mollies, whether or not they were a real group, whether or not they were a mere label for political reasons, whether or not they even existed. The truth remains that men were blamed, convicted, and sentenced to death. On Black Thursday, June 21st, 1877, several reputed Mollies, all Irish, all Roman Catholic, all members of the ancient order of Hibernians, were hung in Mauchunk, which is now known as Jim Thorpe. The prison there may be visited for the full story. The Latimer Massacre of 1897 was a travesty of justice. On September 10th, a group of nonviolent strikers from Latimer Patch, which was owned by the Pardee Coal Company, marched about 6 miles carrying 2 American flags to ask for more pay. Confusion ensued. Numerous deputies shot at the group, and several died from gunshot wounds in their back. The Great Strike of 1902 involved the entire nation. 150,000 miners struck for 6 months for union recognition, higher wages, shorter hours, and better working conditions. The Anthracite Commission, set up by President Theodore Roosevelt, held hearings in Scranton at the Lackawanna County Courthouse. Clarence Darrow brought over 240 witnesses before the commission. In March of 1903, the miners were granted a pay increase, a sliding wage scale, and an 8-hour day. Employment of children was still allowed, but criticized. The strike made the labor organizer Johnny Mitchell famous. 2 years after the Great Strike was settled, the Pennsylvania State Police were founded in 1905, primarily to deal with problems of violence from the miners.
As you were painting, what were some of the thoughts and feelings that you experienced?
Oh, as I was painting these hexagons, I did a lot of crying, actually, because I got very involved with the stories of the Breaker Boys. There was one boy who was trapped inside of a mine, and they were trapped for 9 days, and the miners killed and ate his mule. These mules became pets. So I did a lot of crying. I lived in those mines with those people. It was emotional. I'll say one time, one 4th of July, I was sitting at my desk doing research, and I was reading something for this project, and I was reading something very emotional. And I was bawling. I wasn't just crying, I was bawling. And my husband walked in the front door, and he took one look at me and said, "Oh no, what did I do now?" However, and I said, no, it's about, this is a sad story about this poor boy in the coal mine. I had a lot of fun doing it, too. I learned a lot of things, like about the women. If a miner was killed, or a laborer, they would just bring their bodies back. Sometimes they had to shovel these bodies up and load them into a wheelbarrow. And they would bring them to the porch of the house where they lived, and it was usually a company house, and they dump the body or the body parts on the porch. And the wife, had to prepare this body for burial. their strength, their determination. And then if she didn't have sons to go work for the company, she was going to lose her house. She would lose her home. She'd have to move in with someone else. Somebody else had to take a child here, a child there, her in this one. And the family was broken up. It was a hard road. Part 11 looks at the epilogue. With oil and gas becoming cheaper and easier fuels than coal, the northern anthracite coal fields of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre closed. The kingdom of coal was essentially gone. Today, abandoned mine shafts and slopes are backfilled and obscured by vegetation. Most calm banks have been leveled or reclaimed. Politically, the later disgraced United States Senator from Wyoming Valley, Dan Flood, provided northeastern Pennsylvania with a Veterans Administration hospital, a regional airport, a major interstate highway, I-81, and the Tobyhanna Army Base. Yet in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, northeastern Pennsylvania's most notable export was the area's high school graduates, since there were few local jobs available. Anthracite's final legacy warns all Americans that lives and resources are too precious to waste on personal greed. Yet, it also proves what inner resolve, family spirit, and human determination can achieve. King's College is a big part of this legacy. Its founding statement declares it was originally founded to educate the sons of miners.
Early and late.